Well, thank you very much. We are talking today to Deanna Flores, who's the chair of the Dallas County Community College District and also the vice president of the Greater Dallas Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And we're also speaking with Rene Martinez, who recently served as the former co-chair on the Dallas Mayor's Task Force on Safer Communities, but is very much involved in the community. And so first, now that we know that Chief Hall has submitted her resignation, I wanted to ask you both what you want to see in a new police chief for Dallas.
Jack, before we go there, I just want to make clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of Dallas College. I'm speaking as an individual and a member of Blue Light Council 100.
Got it.
We're both Blue Light members.
Okay, very good. And so given that, what would you each like to see in the next chief?
I'll let Deanna start off.
Well, it's important to have someone that's already familiar with the community. I think one of the things that hindered Chief Hall is that she was not familiar with the dynamics in the southwest part of the United States. Where she came from, it was mostly heavily black-white demographic, and the southwestern part of the United States is not that at all. It's black, white, brown, and increasingly Asian, and certainly somewhat Native American. So that was a hindrance to for her to begin with. And so we need someone that's already familiar with the demographics, ideally of the city, but definitely of this part of the country.
And Rene?
I concur. I think that's one of the main things that we ought to look at. Familiarity with the city, with Texas, with DFW. It's got to be also a person who has a proven track record as a crime fighter. Someone that has had that experience, is able to look at data and crime statistics and be able to deal with a large organization like the Dallas Police Department. So someone that has experience. Unfortunately, Chief Hall did not have that experience of dealing not only with a diverse city like Dallas, but with the span of control in Detroit.
And I wanted to ask you, you know, Chief Hall was the first female police chief in the city of Dallas, and African-American female as well. Do you think it's time that the city have another first for its police chief?
I do. I've dealt with over 8 to 10 chiefs in Dallas since started my career in dealing with civil rights in the 70s. I've seen a lot of chiefs. I've seen some great ones. I've seen some good ones, and I've seen some mediocre and not as good ones. We've never had a Latino chief of police in Dallas. Now, I'm not advocating to have a Latino for the sake of having a Latino. I think the Latino, if we have a Latino, and I hope we do, that person has to have all the skill sets in terms of experience, knowledge of the community, the ability to deal with a large police force, good communication skills, someone that can deal with data, someone's a crime fighter. So the fact that I'm advocating, and I think Deanna is also, that it ought to be someone that's a Latino and bilingual, bicultural, is going to be a skill set that we need in Dallas. Dallas is 42% Latino now, Jack, and growing. The Dallas schools are 73% Latino. So I think the time has come. Like I said, we've had African-American chiefs, and some of them have been very good, and some of them haven't been that good. So the demographics and the need right now, someone that can hit the ground running is, I think, very important.
Deanna, I wanted to give you a chance to answer that as well.
I think it would be very important, as Rene said, I agree, it's not a Latino just to be a Latino. We need definitely someone who has a skill set, someone who already knows the community, and also from day one is ready, someone who has already built relationships with the diverse communities in the city of Dallas. In Dallas, we have an issue right now where us as a population, Latinos as a population, it's at the city level, at the top levels, there's not the diversity, inclusion, and equity for our community. There's 5 top positions in the city that are appointed by city council. None of those currently are Latino. Now, granted, the police chief is hired by the city manager, but We really need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. If Dallas truly values our city leadership, meaning city manager, mayor, council, etc., value equity and inclusion, they need to show it by hiring a police chief that will represent the largest segment of the city of Dallas and that truly reflects equity and inclusion for our community.
Have you expressed your thoughts to the city manager, T.C. Broadnax?
To the city manager, to the mayor, to 3 or 4 of the council members. When they were in the process of hiring the city attorney, we met individually with several of them and said, we don't have equity and inclusion. We really encourage you to hire a Latino city attorney so that one of those 5 top positions, at least we have one, and they did not do that. How long do we have to wait? How long do we have to wait to be respected, to be included, and to have equity?
And what was the response? I mean, you said you spoke to council members, the mayor, and the city manager.
Well, they've been responsive in a positive way, but the actions have not been there. As Deanna cited, the statistics, they're not there in terms of having that representation. So that's why I keep saying the time is now. The time is now for this particular position, chief of police, to be someone, and especially Jack, with the whole thing that's going on with crime and the Latino community. Not that the Latino community represents the highest rates of crime, we have our share. But in terms of within our community, there's a lot of fear and distrust of law enforcement. There is respect, but at the same time, there's distrust. So I think we really need a person that's going to impact on the morale of the police department, which is very low, by the way. And then at the same time, develop that rapport with the community, with a large segment, with over 40% of the community that we have not had.
And what will that provide? In other words, what would that rapport with the police chief provide the Latino community, as far, going forward?
All I can say is look at DISD. We've had Michael Hinojosa being a superintendent for the past 3 to 4 years, and we have great communication. Besides the result, there's a lot of trust among the Latino community for a person like Michael Hinojosa. The lady that just left, Stephanie Lizalde, was the head of all the schools in Dallas, went to Austin. A lot of trust, a very strong manager. You can't underestimate what culture and language does for a population that is the majority or a large portion of our community.
Well, and it's a factor of walking in my shoes. You walk in my shoes, you truly have understanding and insight into what are some of the approaches that can solve some of our issues. Again, that's not to say it only has to be a Latino, but it really is time. It really is time. As Rene said, look at Dr. Hinojosa. He's elevated Dallas ISD to an overall rating of B by the Texas Education Agency, something that was unheard of. Just reflect back 10 years ago where we were in our schools. And the schools are now performing well. So the city of Dallas, in terms of crime, it needs to perform well. It needs to do better in terms of providing safety and security for the citizens across the board that live and reside in the city of Dallas. So a police chief that will have sensitivity, understanding, insight into our community, but also sensitivity and relationships with other segments of the community will be very important. It's not Latinos to the exclusion of everyone else. That is not how we think. That is not how we act. We respect and we expect inclusion and equity.
What do you think, as far as, you mentioned the crime problem, you mentioned just that sensitivity to the Latino community. What do you believe are the greatest needs as it relates to, preventing crime, that kind of thing?
I would say, first of all, it's to get an individual that really has experience as being a crime fighter. Police use that term a lot, and I finally have gotten to understand that definition. Someone who has had that experience and looking at data, commanding a large force being able to allocate resources and then execute that. So that's very, very critical. When I served on the commission, those were some of the things when we looked at all the geographical areas and had all the data in our hands. And then later, the chief comes up with some very, very low goals of achievement. It really disappointed a lot of us. It disappointed the mayor, but it disappointed a lot of us because she really wasn't getting it in terms of what do you do with all the crime that's going on in terms of the deployment of officers, the deployment of resources to those critical areas. So we need to have someone that has the ability to do that. And at the same time, morale. Jack, the morale of our force is not great. And a lot of it has to do with all the issues that have taken place, but also in terms of the leadership role that the chief didn't play in. Contrary to what people say that she was progressive or whatever, morale wasn't great. So we need someone that can come in very quickly, look at the data, understand the community, know the community really. We don't have time for someone to go on a 6 month to a year learning curve. We just don't have time.
In those, Jack, in those high crime areas, I think what should be done is there has to be a very close connection to the city by the police chief and also by officers on the street, by the command structure for the substation that's closest to those high crime areas. They have to keep a close, ongoing rapport relationship with the residents of those high crime communities so that the residents themselves can identify some of the areas where they need help. And it might not always be just a police response. It might be, you know, we need more programs for youth. We need better job training, access to job training, et cetera, et cetera. There needs to be a rapid response team in high crime areas, not only again on the part of the police, but the different governing entities, the city of Dallas, the Dallas ISD, the Dallas College, Dallas County, et cetera, to really bring resources together, leverage the resources that each has to provide pathways to these citizens so that they don't have to go, some of them have to go and commit crimes because they don't find themselves in a position that they can cycle out of it versus cycle further into it. So it's not just the police chief, but the police chief has to have an understanding of what are some of the strategies they can use to be able to reduce crime. And it isn't always just arresting the bad guy, so to speak.
And Jack, we have a lot of talent within the police department right now, a lot of young talent, Latino, Black and white, but because I've been to the academy, some of the classes, and we can't say now that we don't have potential young talent within the force. We do. And so that's a check, that's a asset that we have. And it's how we use that talent, how we use and deploy those resources.
Let me ask you about, is there anybody in the upper ranks of the Dallas Police Department who you believe could be chief?
Yeah, I think we have various people. I don't want to be in a position to name people. I think that's a little premature. But I do think that that's, I do think that's important. That, yeah, we do have people. And we have people not only within the police force, but we have people within the DFW area, people that have been in Dallas and have left. I don't want to see us go out and recruit people from outside of Texas, to be honest with you. I think we have the talent in the DPD. I think we have the talent in DFW, and I think we have the talent in the state of Texas.
Deanna?
I agree with Rene. I think it would be unfair to any one person to say, okay, you're the designated one that we want, because it could backfire. It could say, okay, just because you want them, well, we're going to look elsewhere. And I've seen that happen in other institutions and other organizations. So, but like Rene, I agree. Yes, we have the talent locally, and we don't need to look beyond DFW. And if we have to look beyond, preferably in the state of Texas, because anyone in the state of Texas that isn't blind or has blinders on understands the demographics of this area and of Texas.
And you had expressed, Rene, disappointment in Chief Hall in her relationship with the Latino community, at least early on. Can you talk to me a little bit about it? Why it was so difficult for her to have that rapport with the Latino community?
Well, one, she didn't know the history of our community, of the Latino community. She came from an area from Detroit where she admitted, very few Latinos, number one. So number two, she did not embrace any of our first overtures, which I was one of them. Uh, Very early in her career when she got here, to help her, because I've worked and helped many chiefs throughout my professional career, and she didn't do that. She did not embrace. She did not respond, and so it took her months and months and months and months to do that. Finally, when she did it, it was after a year and a half. It was probably a little too late, and then all those sequence of events took place. The protests, the Black Lives Matter, a lot of other issues came up, and it was just too late. But she did not understand, because I sat with her in meetings one-to-one, explaining to her the history of Santos Rodriguez and Dallas and demographics and our leadership. She didn't do that at the very beginning. She lost a lot of time.
Is the department ahead of where it was when she got here with regards to a rapport and relations with the Latino community?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Some of it was her efforts, recruitment. Diana, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're at 25% of the police force is now Latino, and I think 23, 24, 25 African American. So we're the majority of the police force now is minority. We have a great representation of commanders and majors of Latinos. Some of that was her actions, but again, it was we kind of recommended those things, and
when we were finally able to get her attention, and let me tell you, it took a very hard conversation with her, very hard, very blunt, to get her attention. Then she did start making those moves that were necessary. She formed the Unidos section of the police department to keep in close contact with the community and close communication with the community in different neighborhoods and different sectors. But that's what we're talking about in terms of we need someone who understands these demographics. And let me give you just an example of why I'm saying that. As Rene said, Chief Hall came from Detroit. So when she came in early on, we were excited. We were excited. The first ever in Dallas woman police chief. Didn't matter she was black, brown, white, whatever. It represented a different demographic for the city. But when she was approached by Rene and a couple of other leaders about, encouraging her to be inclusive in her command staff and her top command, her response was, "I won't be bullied." And no one was saying in a threatening way, in a way where, we want to take you on, we're going to fight with you on this. It was a suggestion, please be inclusive. And I was taken aback when I heard that, because that's typically how your racists respond. Whenever people of color are asking to be included at the table, you're not being civic minded, you're not being wanting to participate and be good citizens. No, you're bullies, or you're fighting, or why are you being like that, etc. But when people of either the dominant culture, in this case African American culture, came to her, she was more than accommodating. Went out of her way to meet with certain groups, whereas with us we were initially shut out. But like I said, when we finally got her attention, and it was only because of some very hard conversations with her, she started taking the actions that were needed to really listen to our community and respond to some of the needs in terms of her sphere of influence and responsibility.
And when you've said a couple of times now, some very hard conversations, what does that mean? I mean, can you give us a little more insight into that?
I remember one vividly, and I'm not going to put words into Diana's mouth or my wife's mouth, but they basically said to the chief, the honeymoon is over. we got to do some things. And it was some pretty strong words. That learning curve is over. Yeah, you've been here more than a year. You've got to reach out to the community, and you got to do more than just do, fluffy things. And that's when things started to change. Now, I want to give credit to the city manager. We wouldn't have had that tough conversation with the chief if it hadn't been for the city manager's office. The city manager we've been having meetings with the city manager too, because he's the one that hires. He's the one that's responsible for the chief's actions. But if it hadn't been for the city manager, I don't think we would have had those conversations and that rapport with the chief.
He's the one that, in other words, he's the one that opened that door for us to meet with her, for her to meet with us. It's not that she came to us and said, I need to meet with y'all. He said, you're going to meet with him. But that's because we also went to him and said, we got some issues here. Yeah. And so he was responsive.
Well, I really appreciate the insight that both of you shared with me on this issue. And, we will watch and see how the process unfolds.
We expect the best for Dallas, and we hope we get the best.
It's a beginning chapter. Stay in touch with us, Jack.
All right. Well, Deanna Flores and Rene Martinez, thank you so much. Really appreciate it today.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jack.
Same. Take care now.